team. It's time for the Daily Detangler. How long have we been talking about learning by doing? I don't know about you, but it seems like we've been talking about that for a long time. And I realized over the weekend that I hadn't really explored it or internalized it or thought deeply about what it meant. And also, I was struggling with some tangles around the idea of this doing, the word doing, because we say we don't want to be, we want to orchestrate, not be a doer from the webinar. Sales enablement is at a crossroads. This idea that doing is random and doing is not intentional. It's we don't want to be doers. We want to be stratacutionists, and we want to drive impact. So I was a little bit tangled up on this idea of learning by doing, and what is learning and what is doing, and what kind of actions does that create? So learning by doing, what is it? To me, it's this idea of working on or applying or focusing on. It's a process. It creates understanding. The more I learn by doing, the more I can internalize. And the more I can internalize, the more I can do. And the learning by doing, the more I do that, the more it can create flow. And again, this detangler is built in that way, where I didn't know exactly what I would be producing. There's this challenge of what do I understand about learning by doing? And then, what does it mean to get untangled with that? And how would I do that in front of everybody? How would I use a detangler to get untangled with that? And leaning into what we have for content and experiences to help me do that. So one of those experiences is stone soup. So did they, whoever they are, right, the travelers or the town people, did they learn by doing? Did any learning happen during the stone soup process? When the travelers made observations and looked over the landscape, were they learning? And were they learning by doing? Were they learning by doing when they sat back after they knocked on doors? And were they learning by doing then? And then what about the townspeople who are curious? Were they learning by doing? Are these learning by doing actions and activities where it doesn't necessarily create a quote unquote output? And that's the big aha for me, is this idea of learning by doing was, well, I have to build C slides. I have to produce an output. But in the stone soup story, there's a lot of learning by doing here that didn't necessarily produce a C slide. And what happened? And then I thought about, well, is that the only place where this learning by doing can be observed? And there's a lot of experiences that we've gone through where learning by doing is happening. The riding the backward bike video, and how much learning by doing is happening there. The learning by doing isn't producing the video output. The learning by doing is working out how to unwire the brain and then rewire the brain. It's in the doing. It's in the working it out. The hang gliding exercises that we went through, where we've talked about and learned about change. Mission Impossible that we had on Friday, was that learning by doing? What did we learn there? What was the learning by doing there? How change happens, the Sales Enablement Society and how it was created, and the experiences there. Towson, Software AG. These are, to me, examples of where learning by doing happened. But what is it? What is learning by doing? Is it just random effort? Is it work? Is it something where you try and then you fail? Is that what we mean, trying and failing? Or is there something quality or out, visually that comes out at the end? And what does that look like? So if I zoom in and pause that and zoom in, what does that look like? Well, using the principles of experience here, thinking about these experiences, one of the key aspects of an experience to me is the feeling and the emotions that these experiences created. So what does learning by doing feel like? Well, I don't know about you, but it feels like I'm acquiring something, right? Like there was a delta before, and because I'm putting in the effort, I'm acquiring something new, whether it's a new insight or whatever. Also, learning by doing helps me decide what to do. Using this detangler today, I'm acquiring some sort of talk track here around learning by doing. I've decided what to do by leveraging our past experiences and putting together this structure. I've also zoomed in and focused. And by learning to do this detangler and focusing in on learning by doing, I can provide some emphasis, some focus on a specific topic here by zooming in. I also can, because I'm learning by doing, I'm remembering these past experiences. I'm remembering past conundrums like the speed conundrum. I'm synthesizing because I'm doing. And that to me is what learning by doing feels like. I'm also perceiving, right? There's this perception or this idea of connecting the dots, right? So we have Mimecast, we have IQVIA, Catalyst put out this synthesis over the weekend about going into Act 2. And so how do I stay connected to the reality of what's going on? How do I perceive the world around me? And that's what learning by doing helps me do. It helps me stay plugged into the environment and the team and the people. And then I can predict a little bit better, I think. This has been this is a bit of a stretch for me. I'm not a very good predictor of what's going to happen next year, but by doing this, I'm throwing this on here because I've started thinking about, well, what's going to happen at Mimecast in a week, what's going to happen at Mimecast in 2 weeks, and I feel this gap, right, that Catalyst has been sharing. And so that to me is a little bit around, peeking around the corner. There's some perceiving that and predicting that's happening there. And then it's also producing. And the interesting thing about going through this experiential view was the producing of something was at the end. I didn't start with, well, let me learn by do. So it's about C slides. I started with this idea of if I'm riding the backward bike and I'm trying to learn how to do that, what's happening? Well, I'm acquiring, I'm deciding, I'm focusing, I'm remembering what we've done in the past, I'm perceiving and gathering information, I'm predicting what's going to happen, and then I'm producing something along the way. So these I don't know, feelings or these things that are on the screen here, I think these are helpful to me and the team because these are something that I don't necessarily pay attention to and that I want to do this week. I want to pay more attention to these squares, not the activity and the action squares that I always pay attention to that are not even on this screen. But this idea of what do my actions create? Well, they create these types of feelings and these types of impacts. So what is learning by doing that? Well, if I'm going to acquire and to focus and perceive, remember and decide, right? If these things are going to be what help me, well, how am I going to acquire this? What's the learning part? Because this is the doing, right? So learning by doing, if I break it down, what are some of the learning actions that I can engage in? And this is a bit of an interesting revelation for me, but there's a lot that I can be doing. that I don't necessarily do to create these types of impacts. For example, I know we've talked about listening and active listening, so I put that on here. I know we've talked about drawing and creating the sketches, so I put that on here. Also, watching all these videos from conundrums, and there's just hours and hours of video and watching that. Those are learning actions that I can capitalize on. Writing, Catalyst has said, let's write these things down. I don't do that as much as I could be. Then there's reading what everybody else puts out, whether it's activators notes or their reports, and then it's talking things through. It's the role playing, it's the talking it out, it's the voiceovers, it's the riffs, it's the rap, right? And getting stuff, beat up in the discussion. And then there's the structure. And I was going to put structure instead of thinking, because I can hear Catalyst on my shoulder saying, thinking isn't doing. I think, I don't know if that's what he would say, but thinking is to me part of doing, because that's the structure required to do. And I think if we think in terms of strategy and tactics, the thinking part, and how we go about the logic and the scientific methods and principles and how we think about those, provide that underlying logic. And I see a lot of that in Catalyst. I think he does think a lot of things through. And I think that's part of learning by doing. Now, obviously, if that's all we do, that's not doing. That's not going to help us do and take action. So there's an action piece here of these that's required. And then if I do these things, how is it going to help us and help the team? So what do I see happening with listening, for example, if I break this down? Well, I think listening, when I think about encode, transmit, decode, creates some sort of shared understanding if we actively listen. If we're engaged, we're structured, we have understanding and empathy, this could help learn by doing, because it creates shared understanding, right? So that's one aspect of learning by doing, to me, is this active listening, which is why I think we've been spending time thinking about and doing that. When I think about drawing and why that's helpful to learning by doing, and why that's an aspect of learning by doing, I think drawing it out gets our mind's eye on paper. I know I don't draw out enough, and I've started to sketch more recently. But it's interesting having that notebook, sketching things out and trying to visualize it. Obviously, it's a more of a right brain activity, but it helps me make connections. And most of my scribbles are tough for others to understand, but I see meaning in those. And when I work to try to make them more clear, I can produce something. So a lot of these detanglers, I try to sketch out, or I look for a picture that helps represent my mind's eye, so that I can share and hopefully get a reaction. So drawing is part of learning by doing. So how much drawing am I doing? And then thinking, this idea of structure and logic that I see with Catalyst. I think the idea of thinking things through and connecting those dots, and that to me is a critical part of what Catalyst does to light the match of change and also innovation. And when we provide and think through with a logical structure, when we embrace the structure we have, and the from the conundrums to the reports to our architectures and the way in which we engage, our engagement model, our teaming structure, all of these inform an underlying logic that helps me connect the dots and make relationships, and hopefully produce things that are more digestible, while also at the same time providing some detail. So thinking through and modeling out these detanglers, if thinking through is important. Like, am I Am I aligned to our purpose? Am I trying to be helpful? Am I acting on what I'm, detangling? Am I detangling in front of folks and doing it with? And then talking it out. Like, talking is an interesting one. I tend to do a lot in my head, and a phrase pops into my mind. Sometimes I have a party in my head and nobody else is invited. And that's not good in an environment where we're trying to innovate. And we've, already know that there's so many perspectives required. So how do I talk it out and role play it and, respond when somebody asks me, what's a tangle? And can I even voice that? And then how do I control my emotions, simplify, make things relatable when I talk? How do I be creative and allow and create the idea of guardrails to my conversations when I talk it out? What's in scope? What's out of scope? And that, to me, relates to learning by doing. And it's interesting, the drawing may not actually relate sometimes to the talking out, and sometimes the talking it out may not relate to the actual structure that I thought through. So connecting all these things is like riding the backward bike, and it's easy to fall off. But that's why practice, 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 right? And then there's the reading part. We have a lot to read. We have the reports, we have websites, microsites. And reading to me has always been critical. I've read a lot in the past, and reading to me is a way to build new neural pathways, to open up new ideas. And that's probably critical to our change effort to create content and reports that others can read, because this is a great way to create some sort of new neural pathway in somebody's brain. And also, reading helps me process what's happening, because it's usually providing a perspective. And reading helps me develop a way to interact with others and concentrate and have more empathy. I'm not a very good writer sometimes because it's hard to write about what we're doing, but that's part of this as well. And that writing piece is a way for me to structure the logic. And writing stuff down and creating a Word document around what we're doing. I see all my stuff is in slides, and I've done more to visualize, and I've tried to write bullets and things. But how do I write down a rap or a riff around something like tangles, or something like the idea of learning by doing? How would I write that up for others to consume? And can I get my thoughts out on paper in a logical and structured way that brings people along? And writing can help me prioritize what to say and help me be more creative. But how am I writing? It really points out my logic. And this is what one of my things is my challenge is when I write stuff down, I don't like how it comes across when I read it. It's trippy. So I can write it down, and then I can come back and read it. I don't like it. And then I would talk about the concept in a different way than what I wrote down. And, what is that? So to me, that's part of learning by doing. And putting my written content out to Catalyst, for example, sometimes I get a little bit apprehensive about that, because I don't like how how it comes across when I read it. Another key aspect of learning by doing to me is watching. And we watch a lot of videos, but I can also watch others on the team and model what works. Am I paying attention to what's happening? Am I figuring out how to focus on what works as opposed to what doesn't work? What am I perceiving across the team? What am I perceiving it with relation to how Catalyst engages with clients? And then watching and modeling others helps me internalize what good looks like, and how others manage their time, how they stay calm, what things can I internalize, and that's part of learning by doing to me. So these are all critical components of learning by doing to me that I've unpacked here trying to do this detangler. And it's interesting, the original concept I had coming into the detangler was, well, learning by doing is about producing C slides. I mean, if I had to net it out. But at the same time, I'm also talking about all the time the backward bike and learning by doing there. So if I unpack the backward bike, what would that look like? And to me, this is an unpacking of these experiences that we've leveraged where I've done the most learning, and the learning by doing of watching and listening and drawing and thinking and talking and reading. I've spent a lot of time on the concept of tangles, and I've if that's advancing, it's because of these things I've done on the left. Now, in the middle with these whatever these are kind of new to me. Learning by doing for what? Acquiring and focusing and perceiving and remembering and deciding and predicting and producing. This is a new area to kind of explore. And I love the feedback on what you think about these in the middle here. How much time are you spending on doing the things on the left? And do they help you do the things in the middle? Because I'm trying to figure out how to improve and innovate. And there seems to me to be a gap between drawing things out and making an innovation, right? So what's that space in the middle? And to me, that's the cognitive processes. That's the human brain. These are human attributes that only humans can do to be creative. And that's, to me, my value and our value as humans. So that's principle 6 to me. It's about connecting the dots. This has been actually a really exciting detangler to think about what's possible with regard to learning by doing. And I'd love the feedback on this as we go into the week. And I hope you had a great weekend. And I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. All right, take care.